On top of Navarro Valls at this hour.
Raymond, at the risk of interrupting our chatter, it seems to me now that we have to say, Habemus Papam, we have a pope. The smoke is white.
No, there's no one is confirming this yet, and we will not either, Father. You can say that.
Well,
but
okay, no,
We have confirmation. It appears we do have a new pope.
It appears.
Habemus Papam.
Habemus Papam, as best we can tell.
Habemus Papam. Eminentissimum ag reverendissimum Dominum, Dominum Josephum, Sancte Romane Ecclesiae Cardinalem Ratzinger.
Oh my God.
Cardinal Joseph Ratzinger is the 265th Pope, the 264th successor to St. Peter.
Welcome back, everyone, to the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe, I'm actually a little choked up right now. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not. You know what? You're at the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, Joe Rossinello. Let us go into the breach, everyone. Joe, I literally have tears in my eyes. All right. And I don't think I'm too much of a mush, maybe a little bit, all right? But I love Pope Benedict, and I love our popes. Listen, let's be clear. Just because I happen to get angry or we have some questions about the direction at times and other things with the current pope, okay? But I love our traditions. I really believe sometimes, not in a condescending way, Joe Rossinello, but in a loving way. I wish our Protestant brothers and sisters understood sometimes. That's not an event that happened in 2005. That event's been happening for 2,000 years. The election of a pope has been going on for 2,000 years, from the time that Jesus declared Peter the first pope. And it's very moving. Did you hear the people? In other words, when the church has the certainty, Habemus Papam, we have a pope, all right? And now that pope that we just played a clip of, his election, all right, has now passed. Obviously, he passed a couple weeks ago. And he's going to be known. He's going to be, history is going to treat him, Joe Rossinello, in a way that I think in some ways he is going to overshadow Pope St. John Paul II. Whereas Pope St. John Paul II is known more for his fight against evil in the form of communism and what he did to free all the people of Europe from the yoke of communism, which I believe that's why God made him the Pope, was to do that. But Joseph Ratzinger / Pope Benedict XVI is going to tower over John Paul II in this way. He gave us I don't want to say intellectual depth. We've always had that with Thomas Aquinas and Augustine, all the doctors and philosophers of the church. But he took all of that and he made it very accessible for guys like us. Why? Because we can't read Aquinas? No, that's not the case. But because we don't have to, because we had a pope and when he was cardinal, spoke very plainly and wrote very plainly about the faith in a way where not only was it accessible, but it also moved your soul. And I think that's what people are going to realize when they look at the corpus of his work over, Joe, how many decades has Cardinal Ratzinger been around? It's back-to-back two very, very impactful leaders of the Roman Catholic Church. I want to start with this, Joe, because there's a couple things to talk about when it comes to Pope Benedict XVI. All right. And if anybody's here, by the way, expecting Joe and I to beat up on Pope Francis, tune out now, go somewhere else, because that's not what we're doing. That is not our purpose. Okay. Our purpose is to talk about what we feel from a personal point of view about Pope Benedict XVI and what we believe his legacy will be. I want to start with this, Joe Rossinello. Jesus, I love you. Jesus, I love you. Two comments, and I'm handing it over to you. Number one, you could break down the entire gospel to that. Those very simple words. That if in our heart we truly believe that, all right, we know we're on the right path. Jesus, I love you. Okay. And the fact that those were his last words on this earth. And he was a great man. He was a great pope. And I want to throw it over to you, Joe, because sometimes I think we get caught up in a lot of things. Some of that's worthy. But at the end of the day, it comes down to Jesus, I love you. What do you got to say, Joe?
Well, ultimately, it all boils down to that. I mean, I did a short on it. Aquinas, who arguably had the strongest mind, one can argue, you know, one of Bonaventure, Aquinas, Augustine, Benedict, you know, people who were incredibly intelligent, pointed to all his books and said, everything I've done up until now is just straw. That was his last set of words. I mean, it's similar to people, you know, regular people. No one says when they're going to die, I should have worked more. I mean, like, death is one of those things that puts all things in perspective. And it comes down to that, because here's the deal. I mean, if you don't believe in God, you're basically dangling off of a 50-story building. It's over. Party's over. Jesus is the answer to the kingdom. I mean, that's it. There is no other way out. So, I mean, he gets it. It all comes down to that. We have to live each day with that idea. And I think sometimes all of us, myself at the front of the line, you know, you get bogged down in things that frankly don't mean a darn thing. They don't mean a darn thing, whether you're in the back of the pew in a very modest place in this world, going to church, or you're the Pope. It comes down to God first, loving neighbor second. I mean, those are the two commandments. And I mean, it says it all. It really does.
You know, I think about it when you think about those words, Jesus, I love you. Okay. One of the things, Joe Rossinello, that the church does is, you know, that's obviously the fundamental. God is a God of love. The Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It is a relationship, a pure, like what you would call absolute love. Okay. So you say that to yourself, Joe Rossinello. You say, yo, Jesus, I love you. But then that is where the theology comes in, because then you have to, and this is where Pope Benedict XVI, both as Pope and as Cardinal, brought it, giving that, expands that idea out somewhat. How do I love Jesus? Why do I love Jesus? Who is he that I ought to love him? I think that's why it's so important to focus on Pope Benedict's last words and understand, let them resonate in our heart and in our intellect. Why do I love Jesus? You made a good point, Joe, and this is going to segue into another point about Benedict that I really want to talk about, the dictatorship of relativism. Because you have to say to yourself, why do I love Jesus? Well, I love Jesus because he's the Logos incarnate. And then that'll lead to another question. Well, what is the Logos? Okay. And you made a good point. You said, well, if you don't believe in God, you're kind of dangling from a 50-story building about to go splat on the sidewalk. We love Jesus because he is the way, the truth, and the life. And Pope Benedict gave us, in his writings and his exhortations and his speeches, it's all about being focused on that. But he also warned of dangers. And this is where I want to go, Joe. I want your comments. The dictatorship of relativism. If you had 3 words that you might sum up his writings with, I think that might be a good candidate for what he's most known for, is that. And I'd like to hash it out, because guess what, Joe? Is that not what we're seeing right now? He was prophetic. He said, this is what all this nonsense is going to lead to. You want to be a relativist and you think that's going to make you free. But what he does is he takes the relativism part and he attaches it to the dictatorship part. Because most people don't want to think that way. When most people, Joe, when they think I'm free from right and wrong, Nietzsche says we need to be beyond good and evil. Pope Benedict Ratzinger said, no, that leads to dictatorship. What's your thoughts, Joe?
Well, this is, I think, the mistake of secular people. They disregard what people who are close to God have to say. There is something to being prophetic when you're close to God. And I got news for you. You don't even have to be the Pope. Holy people, People, what's a holy person? Person who's in a state of grace, a person who receives the sacrament in a state of grace, a person who goes to confession regularly, a person who prays daily, a person who fasts, a person who gives alms, a person who lives a sacrificial life. These are people where you have to empty yourself in order to be filled by God. And people who do that see the world clearly. They see it in a way that others don't. It doesn't make them smarter. It doesn't make them better. It's just their vision is clearer. And Pope Benedict was a very holy man. And a lot of people in the church have made statements that absolutely positively have happened. Paul VI with Humani Vitae, all that he said happened. We can go on and on.
But one thing I want to
Pius IX, Leo XIII. I mean, like, it's just, and he was a holy man. The mistake of the secular world is they don't listen to people who are obviously holy. And you can tell when someone's holy. I got news for you. And he made many statements, to be truthful with you.
Yeah. I wanted to focus on dictatorship of relativism because I think that that's exactly the state we find ourselves in. Now, Joe, I talk to a lot of people just in my travels, okay? And you know me, I have a big mouth, all right? We both have big mouths, so I like to have conversations. I don't have to have a conversation with a fellow Roman Catholic. I can have a conversation with anybody I want, okay? I'm comfortable enough in my faith and able to defend the faith that I love talking to atheists. I like talking to people who are not Catholic, okay? But you made a good point. When you don't believe in God, when you don't have that grounding, when you don't have that root, okay, which is objective truth. Let's keep it there for a second, okay? Christ as the truth. Okay, what is truth? Truth is objective, okay? There is right, there is wrong. There's not moral relativism. There is objective morality, okay? And I talk to atheists, let's say, and I know it bothers them when Catholics say, dude, listen, you don't have any basis for right and wrong. You're basically a relativist. It's what someone believes to be right, what you believe to be right. You can't say what's right and wrong, but then when somebody turns around and wants to impose on you what they believe to be right, or that you're wrong and you're an atheist, okay, what are you going to do then? When you know something to be unjust or immoral, and yet it's being done to you. Well, Joe, that's like you describing the person hanging off the 50-story building, okay, about to go splat on the sidewalk. You have no grounding. You can't even judge the situation because, as Benedict said, you're living not just in an age of relativism. You're living under the dictatorship of relativism. You will not believe in objective truth, but yet they state that as objective truth. You see where I'm going with that, Joe?
No, I
Is
hear
that
you.
because
The
everybody
proof's
is
in the
off the
pudding.
rails? Everybody's off the rails talking about your truth, his truth, my truth. As my mother would say, tutta gabaregats, truth, okay? When there's only one truth. And that's
The
the problem.
proof's in the pudding,
Benedict
though.
said that.
I that's probably what he goes down for, you know, in terms of the homily. One of the big things he said, anyway, if you wanted to pick themes that, you know, he'll be remembered for. But the proof's in the pudding about people who basically ground their life in relativism. It shows. Ultimately, it's like that. What do they always say? The cream rises to the top. Well, it's the same thing when you ground your life in nothing. Ultimately, it collapses. It's mathematical. I've seen this in the arc of my own life with people in my own family, friends of mine. It's just the way it is. Ultimately, the truth is the truth. It's unshakable. There's certain things that are written on the hearts of men. You could call it anything you want. Tell yourself. Don't tell me. Tell yourself. Ultimately, it won't work, and it doesn't work. And that's what he talked about. And basically, he's not telling people that to basically lecture them or necessarily beat them over the head. It's for your own good. It's like what I tell my kids. I never will tell you anything that's going to hurt you. That is what the church does. It's a mother. Ultimately, it's your choice. It's your life.
Well,
It's
Joe,
your
along
life.
the lines of what you always say here at the front line with Joe and Joe, when people want to argue against objective truth and argue for relativism, I would borrow a line from Joe Resinello. Okay, go look out the window. Tell me how that's going for you.
That's right. Or even for yourself. I mean, but people live in rationalizations. They lie to themselves, but it is what it is. I mean, ultimately, the church, like any good mother, wants what's best for her children. Benedict was speaking the truth. And you talk about his pontificate. He was a faithful son of the church. He was clear. Benedict was clear and he was faithful. Ultimately, that's all we have to be as Catholics, faithful. We can't control outcomes, many outcomes we have no control over. Christ asks us to be faithful, and he was. Pope Benedict was a faithful soul. And to be honest with you, I think he'll become a saint. I do. I also think he'll become a doctor of the church. You made the comparison between him and John Paul. They were different men,
Right.
very different men. But at the same time, both made huge contributions to the church. We're privileged to live in a time where we saw two popes in our lifetime. John Paul was canonized in 6 years, dude. 2 miracles, too. I always point to that because when people have issues with people, 2 legitimate miracles, that means God intervened. God intervened.
Yes.
6 years. That is very notable. Benedict, I believe in my lifetime, I'm 52 years old. I think I'll see him get canonized too. I also think he'll become a doctor of the church. There's only, I think, 37 doctors of the church. Someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm probably in and around the ballpark. 37 in 2,000 years.
Right.
That is significant. He wrote 66 books, 3 encyclicals. He was in Rome for 3 decades. I mean, significant contribution that man made.
Yeah.
He was given many gifts and he used them. Ultimately, that's what we all have to say. When we stand before the Lord, it's one of the gospel parables. I gave you 10 coins, I gave you 5, I gave you 1. Whatever you've been given, you have to use. And Benedict did.
Yes,
He
he did.
used his gifts. He lived a holy life. And ultimately, we're all called to that. And to be honest with you, we're all blessed to have seen this man, to be truthful, lived on the earth while he's there. And to your point too, I think let's put it this way, his tomb at St. Peter's is going to have a lot of foot traffic over the centuries. There's no question about that.
As well it should. As well it should. If you're just joining us here, you're at the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo, Joe Rossinello. We're way in the breach on the Crusade channel, always on air and always online at crusadechannel.com. Joe, one of the things that we come to the realization of, I guess, when you're a Roman Catholic is that whether you're us, I don't care if you're church militant, I don't care if you're Taylor Marshall, I don't care if you're Patrick Coffin, I don't care if you're what's Pikes with Aquinas, Matt Fradd, Trent Horn, I don't care who you are. If you're Catholic, you have the sights of the media, the culture, okay? The culture of death are squarely on you. That we all know. If you're going to get into the public arena and you're going to start spouting out Catholic truth, okay, you better be prepared to take a beating, okay? And that's what a lot of people do. So my point is, I expect that from the media. I expect that from the secular culture, okay? What I don't like, Joe, and I want to be charitable. That's why I talk to you, Joe Rossinello, because you helped me to be a more charitable Catholic, okay? Is I don't like those within the church that want to beat up on Benedict. I don't, Joe. I have a very, very low tolerance for that. And I'm going to give you an example, and I want your comments, okay? So I don't know if he's the head of the Jesuit order or if he's one of the higher ups. Father, I believe Thomas Reese.
He's just he's an American Jesuit.
He's an American Jesuit, which God help him. Sorry, God help him. All right. He's mourning, according to him, he's mourning the passing of Benedict XVI. It says, I will forgive you, Pope Benedict XVI, okay, for your sins. And what did he mean by that? Because as Cardinal Ratzinger, when he was the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, and as Pope, he insisted on orthodoxy. And Joe, I'm getting tired, Joe. You got to help me out because my anger gets up here. Okay. I'm getting tired of hearing how orthodoxy is a bad thing. In the church, Joe, orthodoxy is necessary. Okay. Now, are there a variety of opinions on prudential matters? Of course there are. And good people in the church could come together and talk about those things that are a matter of prudential judgment. But when it comes to the teachings of the church, the immutable teachings of the church, particularly on faith and morals, Father Reese, you don't tell Pope Benedict that you forgive him. You have to ask for the church for forgiveness for your heterodoxy, for your support of dissidents, both within your order and outside your order. Joe, the gall on this man to say, I forgive Benedict, my initial response, Joe, and please help me with this, was, who the hell are you to forgive Benedict? What do you do that's so great? You and your order, you American Jesuits that just go out there and you lie to everybody. You lie about the teachings of the church. You lie about theology. You lie about salvation. And that's what you are. You're a bunch of liars because you never tell the whole story. Okay? And that's what I don't like. And that's what, and so my larger point is, it's one thing when it happens from outside the church. Attacks on Benedict. Susan Sarandon, I remember years ago, called him a Nazi. She's a Hollywood whatever. So I expect that from her. But when a Father Thomas Reese in the Jesuit order in America says about Benedict, I forgive him of his imposition of orthodoxy on the church, Joe, I shake my head. And I'm sorry, I get very angry.
Well, here's the thing. I don't even know who he is, to be honest with you, but that's my point. No one's going to know who he is. Think about this. Thomas Becket was the only prelate that basically stood up against Henry VIII. He was killed. All the rest of them signed.
Thomas More.
No.
Becket was Henry. Becket was Henry II.
Oh no, but Becket was he was an archbishop.
Yes. But it was Henry II. Thomas More was Henry
VIII. But using Becket, one prelate basically stood up to England, the kingdom. Who's remembered? Him. What's it called? Athanasius. He was an archbishop.
Mm-hmm.
They basically said Athanasius against the world. Who's remembered? Him. The rest of them are forgotten. No one will remember the critics. And also regarding the Jesuits, listen, I think they get a lot of bad press. There's a lot of voices. America Magazine's big voice. I don't even know who Reese is, to be honest with you. I know he's an American Jesuit. There are good Jesuits. You see, the problem is the louder voices are what's heard. When you meet a Jesuit that's good, there's no better. Like Father Paul Mankowski, Father Joseph Katarski, Father Fessio, Father McTague on Stations of the Cross.
Right.
Because they're brilliant. And they're holy and they live their vows. It takes 11 years to become a Jesuit. We hear the voices a lot of times that, frankly, but that's in everything and it's in everywhere. There's always been dissenting voices in the church, always, from the beginning of time, from the original 12. I'll be truthful with you. They will disappear. Benedict's voice will go on. It will be remembered. All those voices disappear. The 80 people who signed against Humane Vitae in Canada, the 80%.
Nobody knows their names.
No one knows who they are.
Right.
And that is how it goes. And we could go on and on and on. The problem is that they do cause harm, though, because they lead people astray.
Ultimately, well, that's really, Joe, that's really my issue is that I agree with you. I look, at the end of the day, like you said, nobody's going to remember you when you're a Father Thomas Reese. And Father James Martin is going to be forgotten too. All right. For Catherine is in the chat room. She says Benedict Rochelle. Benedict Rochelle will be remembered. He might even become a saint. No. But I was just talking about in terms of who we remember and who we're not going to. Okay. So if, let's say, for argument's sake, you have a Father Reese or James Martin or whatever the case would be, I think you're absolutely right. But, and Joe, this is one of those things, and one of the reasons why you and I actually open our mouths on the Crusade Channel, always on air and always online, at crusadechannel.com, is because we want people. Why? Because we're brilliant. Why? Because we're holy. I want to be holy. I'd like to become a holy man. Okay. I'm trying. All right. As you are trying. We're trying. We're fighting. Paul says, fight the fight and run the race to the end. We're both trying in our own way, in our own situations. We're trying to move forward. It's not because it's because when you're close to the sacraments, when you're attending mass, when you're praying, when you're doing all those things, then those who would seek to lie to you, they're going to find that their lies fall on deaf ears. And that's really my larger point, is that some of these men in the church, okay, they're out there and they're misleading people. Why? Because they're blatant liars? I don't know that they are. I follow James Martin on Twitter, okay? I just recently upped my Twitter game because I actually believe that Twitter will be a more open platform now. I follow James Martin. I haven't commented at all on anything he posts. If you were to just follow him, you would think, wow, this guy's a really great priest. Talks about loving Jesus, loving your neighbor, all the good things, okay? Until he wants to open his mouth about things that he should not. And that's my larger concern, Joe Resinello, is, yeah, you wouldn't like it, Joe, if somebody lied to you. If a priest lied to you about your sins, you wouldn't like it. And if a priest lied to me about my sins, oh, it's just okay. Don't worry about it. Go give $100 to the poor. You'll be fine. No. My sins can send me to hell. That's my problem with some of these Jesuits. But I agree with you. And we've said this at the show, on the show at the Frontline with Joe and Joe many, many times. Joe, when the Jesuits are good, they're great. And when they're bad, you better watch your butt. Final comments, Joe, on that, and then we'll move on.
But even regarding, there's been damage. I mean, there is damage being done in the church now. The church, there's a lot of confusion, but God will judge that accordingly. I mean, if you're misled, like for instance, say you want to take a flight to Cleveland and there's like a 1A and a 1B at the airport. You're supposed to get in 1A and you got in 1B and you were sincere in doing it. And you got on the plane and they were like, well, you're not going to Cleveland. You're going to San Diego. Oh my gosh, I thought I was getting on the plane. Well, God's going to judge you accordingly. It's in your heart. It's in your heart. God knows the hearts of men and he'll judge accordingly. And to be truthful with you, some of these clerics could be sincere in their approach. It's just not maybe effective. Who knows? Or they might not be. But God will judge it. Justice will be served when it's all said and done.
No,
the problem is it keeps people away from the church. A lot of people don't know what the church really is about. The press focuses on the bad, does not focus on the good. And that's a shame.
Yeah.
In many cases, we're our worst nightmare. In many cases. But ultimately, justice is going to be served.
Well, I think that's a problem, but that's a problem, I think, for conversion. When we don't speak with one voice, the church is supposed to be of one mind, which is the mind of Christ. And on matters of faith and morals, okay, the church has to be unified on that. And yes, the faithful have to be unified. Sorry, all you people out there that might be listening to us. No, you can't support contraception and say that you're a great Catholic. I don't embrace any of my sins. And I certainly don't embrace the lies of the world. So if you're doing that, you really need to question yourself. This is not a matter of prudential judgment. It's a matter of mortal sin and grave evil and that which is not. Okay. So on faith and morals, my concern, Joe Resinello, is that we're not. I think right now in this church, at this point in history, we don't speak with one voice, particularly with communications being the way it is now. You could get some priest in an outer outpost in Romania spouting out about some in some dissonant way in the church, and Twitter will pick up on it, and YouTube will pick up on it, and that guy will go viral saying that, well, actually sodomy is not actually a sin, or just using that as an example. We don't have that. And what my problem more than anything with Father Thomas Reese was the man who we're talking about, Pope Benedict XVI, he insisted on orthodoxy when it came to faith and morals. And someone like a Father Reese says, that's actually really what he's saying is the insistence on orthodoxy is a sin. That's what he's saying. Because what would you forgive him for then, Father Reese? If you're saying you forgive him, what do you forgive him for? Because being orthodox nowadays, anyway, seems to be sinful. Joe, I'm going to give you the final word before we pivot over and talk about the shenanigans in the U.S. Congress.
Well, ultimately, there is a lack of clarity, particularly coming from Francis. That's my one big beef with him from the very beginning. I can remember the first conversation I had with my wife about that. He's not clear. That's not good. I don't know his heart. I don't know if it's malicious. God's going to judge him for that. I can't say that. I can't. But I can say, because I'm a human and I listen and I see he's not, there's things he's not clear. And I think that's caused harm. And that's just me being charitable and me being accurate in my view. Benedict was clear. As far as people who are confused, the church is still clear. Read the catechism. It's a very readable document. The 1992 catechism, which, by the way, Benedict spearheaded, Benedict XVI, when he was Joseph Ratzinger, the cardinal, had a lot to do with it. It's very clear. If you want to know the truth is there. And one of the things I believe how we'll be judged is this. There are many people that are sincere, but they're off. They are. In many ways, I'm not a theologian, I could be off on certain things. Sure. like I do believe that God does guide us through the Holy Spirit, but nobody's perfect. Here's the thing. Were you searching for the truth? I believe, like, when you stand before God, what was your priority? Was it the truth? Not your truth, the truth. And I got news for you. When you come to the truth, there's a peace and there is a joy. There's a rest in the truth. I guess, not for lack of a better way to put it, I guess issue or concern is maybe better. Are we making that our priority? Or do we have angles? Do we hear things that we just want to hear? Whether we're Catholic or not, that suit our lifestyle. We disregard what we don't want to hear because it's inconvenient or it's uncomfortable. It causes us to sacrifice. It could cost us relationships. It could cost us money.
Right.
That is how we will be judged. We will be judged on that. Was searching for the truth your priority? And to be honest with you, some people, and it's easy to lie to yourself. It's easy to rationalize. People choose to read certain things. They don't read other things. Why? Because it's inconvenient. And this is where we have to clear our vision, go to confession, and look at things as they are. And those who do that will have, to be honest with you, an easier time before God than those who don't. And your life on earth will be better too. You'll be happier. You'll have more joy and peace. And that's where it comes right down to. Right. The church is clear. Read it. And then it's up to you. It's up to you. It's up to me. We either choose to take it as it is or we configure it the way we want it. And many people do. Right. And there's many who don't. Right. And ultimately, when it comes right down to it, there won't be that many excuses, Joe. Like in life, God presents us with things, moments, people, events, where we question ourselves and we have to make a choice. It's at those moments that we should choose the right as opposed to the wrong. And that's how we'll be judged.
I agree. I agree. I do want to, before we move on, I want to mention Patrick's in the chat room. He says, Father Pacwa and Father Spitzer are both excellent. I just want to comment on that, Joe. I'm not going to try to be a troublemaker, I promise you. I love them both. I learned a lot from Father Pacwa over the years with EWTN. I've been on a Father Spitzer kick lately. He's all over YouTube.
We're talking to him soon, dude.
That's right. We're going to have a conversation with Father Spitzer very soon. And I'm really looking forward to that. Joe, I know this is totally out of left field, but I'm going to throw it out there at the front line with Joe and Joe because that's what we do, okay? I watch social media. I want to see a lot of times what the other side is saying, and yes, there is another side. And I'll tell you something, man. these atheists, some of them really bother me. I'm talking about like in my gut. I was like, I get a stomach ache, Joe, when I listen to some of them. And one of them, and that's why I'm bringing up Father Spitzer, is a guy by the name of Neil deGrasse Tyson. And if you ever want, I thought Sam Harris was annoying. I thought Richard Dawkins was annoying. I certainly knew when he was alive, Christopher Hitchens was annoying, but at least Christopher Hitchens was intelligent, even though he was annoying. Neil deGrasse Tyson is a really rude, condescending guy. And every time I see him pop up in my feed, which I shouldn't be scrolling, let me say that first of all right? When I see him pop up in my feed, the first thing I want to say is, dude, your worst nightmare is if Joe and I had some influence. Because if Joe and I had some influence, I would shame you in the public arena to have to get up on a stage with Father Robert Spitzer, who is not only a theologian and a philosopher, is also an astrophysicist and a cosmologist. You don't get much more credentialed than that. And I would love to see that guy, that know-it-all. Joe, remember in high school when we were with junior year, senior year, and we both went to Catholic school, you always get that smart-ass kid hanging out in the quadrangle, basically thinking he knows everything. He doesn't buy into the Catholic Church. Hey, dude, you really don't listen to all that nonsense, do you? Neil deGrasse Tyson is that annoying 17 or 18-year-old kid who thinks he knows it all because he knows a thing or two about science. My larger point, and I know I'm being too long-winded here, I would love, Joe, I would pray to our Lord that he puts us in a position that we could orchestrate that debate. Because Father Spitzer on a stage with Neil deGrasse Tyson will on science and metaphysics will squash him like a bug, intellectually speaking. I just wanted to throw that out there because we were talking about Jesuits. Father Spitzer, he's one of those
true
guys.
Son of Ignatius. I mean, like I said, they're out there. Like, people shouldn't, it's funny. Cardinal George, I remember somebody badmouthed the Jesuits. Francis George, very holy man. And he said, that's what you think. Like, there are very good Jesuits.
Yes.
The sad part is a lot of the voices out there maybe are some of the ones that aren't leading the way on that front, but they're there. And I believe too, I mean, keep this in mind, talking about Benedict. One of the first things he did do is he called all the Jesuits to Rome. He took out the head Jesuit and he put a new one in himself. Pope Benedict did that as the Pope. And keep this in mind too. Orders peak and valley. I mean, Teresa of Avila reformed the Carmelites. I believe the Jesuits will be reformed. There will be a Jesuit. Do you know how many saints are Jesuits? Do you know how many doctors of the church are Jesuits? They're an amazing, amazing order. They need a reform, and they'll get one because God does not abandon his sons. They're there. They're in the order. And also young priests coming up now as a result of John Paul II, that, what do they call it, JP2 generation. Those priests are Orthodox. And I got news for you. I think the church is going to do much better in 20 years because all of these bishops now that came up in the 60s and 70s during the time where the spirit of Vatican II were flourishing, they're dying off. They're retiring. They're gone.
Or they're passing away.
Soon. It's over. And the new ones coming up are going to be 100 times better. You watch.
Well, when you look at, let's say, the way church history has gone, all you have to do, I mean, you could go through 2,000 years of church history. If you want to see a good comparison when the church is strong as opposed to when the church is weak, go look at the church in the 19th century and then compare that to the church in the 20th century. There is an ebb and flow, Joe. I agree with you 1,000%. And ultimately, truth, because the truth is a person, Jesus Christ, is going to win out. What happens in the meantime in the trenches and in the breach, that's why we're here. That's what we're called to do, is to make sure that at the very least we're standing up for that truth, that maybe somebody listening to our voice, because we're struggling. Again, I'm going to say it again. We're fighting the fight. I'm just trying to get through life so I can get me, my wife, my son, and anybody else I can to heaven. All right. I want to fight this fight. And that's what we have to do in the meantime. Whether the church is strong in the world or whether the church is weak, we all have to do our part. Now, let's pivot, Joe. Joe, let's pivot for a second to American politics, if you don't mind, because it's been rather eventful. I'm going to say something. It's been rather eventful. And usually, Joe, political shows, I don't put that much credibility in, but I got a lot of entertainment value over the last week or so with everything going on in the United States Congress. For those of you who are just joining us, you're at the front line with Joe and Joe. Joe Pasillo and Joe Rossinello are way in the breach. Please help us on social media where you can. We don't ask a lot, Joe and I. But what we would ask is on the Crusade channel, go check out the website. Check out the Crusade channel. We know you're going to love it, crusadechannel.com. Joe and I are at the front line with Joe and Joe on YouTube. More importantly, we're trying to build up our Twitter presence because we believe, at least for now, Twitter is going to be a more open platform. And so we are at with Joe and Joe, at with Joe and Joe on Twitter. We'd ask you to follow us there if you don't mind. We're going actually live on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube with our social media shows now with Twitter also, like I said. Now, American politics, Joe, I know we're talking about, when we go from talking about God and mercy and love and forgiveness and ultimate meaning and ultimate reality, we're talking about Father Spitzer and astrophysics and things like that. Joe, sometimes you got to talk about stupid stuff. And the United States Congress, the United States House of Representatives spent the last couple of weeks trying to elect a Speaker of the House. And I'm going to tell you something. I enjoyed watching it go back and forth because I'm at the point, Joe, I don't care until some things that we won't mention because YouTube will take us down. But with some things we won't mention get straightened out, I really don't care who's in control of the House. I don't, because none of it matters unless you straighten out some more fundamental things. However, let's keep it here. There was a fight between Matt Gaetz and 20 other Republicans, including Lauren Boebert, a congresswoman from Colorado, and they're trying to fight for certain things. And you say to yourself, well, we got a razor-thin majority. We vote Republican, you and I, many people out there at the Crusade channel. We have a razor-thin majority. What are you guys fighting over? Well, I'll tell you what. We have a clip of Lauren Boebert. We're going to play it. We're going to come back, and then we're going to talk about it.
A week, huh? I'm sure things here in DC looked pretty messy from home, but I'm a mom of 4 boys, so chaos and dysfunction have been a part of my life for quite some time. Actually, this was the most productive and functioning assembly of the House of Representatives I've seen since I've been here. Sure, it took a few extra days, but our conversations have proven it's okay to take a little extra time to make sure we get this right. Electing the second in line to the presidency of the United States is a serious matter worth our consideration and our deliberation. Everyone knows Congress is broken, but we just took a giant step toward mending it. History will show our resolve changed how Congress operates, that we stood up to the swamp and said enough is enough, that we seized the opportunity to return the power to the people. We are changing the way business is done in DC because we stood strong and held our ground. We will now have the opportunity to vote on term limits. Because we stood strong, we will vote on border security. Because we stood strong, we won't be forced to vote on 1,000-page bills in the dead of night without having time to read them. Instead, we'll tackle appropriations through our committees. We will be able to offer amendments. There will be transparency, so everyone has an opportunity to have their voices heard. Earmarks will be voted on their merit, not passed out as candy to gain votes. Legislation will be on single subjects, not filled with unrelated garbage. Our success this week is truly a win for everyone who believes in representative government. And Congress is better off because of this fight. My colleagues and I are now truly empowered to do our jobs in the House of Representatives. The founders intended for every representative to have a voice for you, your voice heard in the people's house, not for just the power brokers to force horrible legislation that bankrupts our country. I'm optimistic we will be stronger, more united, and more effective than ever. Thank you so much for standing strong, being patient, and for all of your support. God bless y'all.
See, I like Joe Rosino. I like Lauren Boebert.
I like her too.
And she says, she goes, thank you for your patience. I have when it comes to politics, Joe, I have the patience of Job. I don't get angry anymore, really, at politics. I mean, I get angry in a fun kind of way, and I get angered at individual things. But at the end of the day, drag it out. Drag it out. I don't care. Matt Gaetz and her and the other 18, keep it going. Hey, listen, elect Hakeem Jeffries as Speaker of the House. Why? It's any worse than having a rhino Republican who's just going to keep all the policies in place that Nancy Pelosi instituted and all the things that keep the swamp moving along and chugging along? Well, why? What's the difference between that and Hakeem Jeffries, who's a radical leftist? He's a thug from New York. That's what he is. I'm sure if he ever saw this, he'd say racist because I called him a thug. No, I call him a thug because that's what he is. He's a bully from New York, and he thinks he could bully everybody with his language. He thinks he's very conciliatory. In the meantime, he's a bomb thrower. That's what he does. But let him be Speaker of the House. What do I care? Kevin McCarthy, what am I worried about hurting his feelings? What do I care about that? You want to keep everything in place that Pelosi put in place, and what? I'm supposed to say, bully for you, Kevin. Thank you very much. I voted. I'm with the people that voted for you. Just like I had to vote for David Schweikert here in Arizona. Okay? He's a Republican. You think I'm proud of that vote, Joe Rossinello? My attitude is this. I don't care. How about a little feistiness? And that's where I'm going, Joe. I'm going to hand it over to you at the front line with Joe and Joe. They showed some fight, Matt Gaetz and Lauren Boebert and the rest of them. And they actually got something. They actually got something. Go ahead, Joe.
Well, let's see if it happens. I mean, I did a little research on her. I mean, I like her. You know, she didn't graduate high school. She quit high school her senior year because she became pregnant. She has 4 children. She's married. She started a business. They own, I believe, a restaurant, her family. Matt Gaetz went to William and Mary Law School, which means if he wasn't doing this, he'd be making $1 million a year. That's a very competitive law school. Why do I bring that up? Matt Gaetz does not need this job. He's a young man. If they vote him out, Matt Gaetz will be just fine. Sadly, though, most people that are in Congress can't say that. This is all they can do. That's all they've ever done, and they're career politicians. Everything they asked for, the reason why they held out is they don't trust Kevin McCarthy.
That's right. That's right.
Matt Gaetz said that. They also said, Lauren said this, I heard it on an interview on Michael Knowles. He blew them off. They put forth these things to him before. I don't trust him either. And frankly, I don't know if these things are going to happen. Because again, big money is behind Kevin McCarthy. That's how the machine works. She says Congress doesn't work. Well, let's break down why Congress doesn't work. Why isn't Congress the House of the people, not the House of the people? I'm going to summarize it for all of you. Because they get money. They get money from special interests, both sides of the aisle. And many of them play both sides, like the Koch brothers. They give money to both sides. BlackRock, they give money to both sides because they know how the machine works. You want to fix Congress. I'll tell you right now how you fix Congress. You could only give $100, whether you're JP Morgan or you're Joe Rossinello. Every legal entity with a tax ID could only give $100, and your grassroots campaigning is how you get money to run. You just fix Congress. They'll never do it. Do you actually think that term limits are going to pass? Do you actually think that people who that is their career, the only thing they've ever done, maybe the only thing they're ever qualified to do, are going to cut their own throat? Never going to happen. The system is broken because it's been enabled to be broken. We no longer have a government of the people. And to your point, the Republicans are nothing more than a Democrat light. And every once in a while, you do get a voice like Matt Gaetz. And to be honest with you, many people hate him. But I'll tell you this, he fought for accountability.
Well, I want you to get into that. I want you to get into that.
To a budget. That applies to all of us. That helps all of us. He didn't get it and he didn't win. When those things, I think she's a little naive, to be honest with you. I don't think she's been around enough, to be honest, in all fairness to her. I'm not saying she's ignorant. She hasn't been around in the game. The game is played by putting your hand out. You have to take money because you have to campaign. And until that gets fixed, Congress will be broken.
Joe, I want to push back a little bit. All right. Not in a negative way. I think I agree with you when it comes to her experience. All right. But here's the thing. I've always thought, I certainly don't think this about you, but But I always thought that those people who complain all the time about politicians, congressmen, senators, presidents, governors, blah, 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 blah. They're a bunch of crooks. They're a bunch of this. Then when an outsider comes in who has no experience of government, who's a mom like Lauren Boebert, doesn't have a high school degree, but has eyes, has ears, can speak, and has reason and intelligence, okay? When she comes along and she says, I would like to offer some solutions. You're not qualified. You're not Kevin McCarthy. You haven't been there for 15 years or 20 years. You're not John Boehner when he was there, or Nancy Pelosi, who's been there from the 90s. You don't have the experience. Here's my view. I'd love to know what you think, Joe. That's right. I would run on. You're right. I don't have the experience for 20 years of being a crook in Washington. I want to go in and I want to beat the crooks on behalf of the American people. See, a lot of people, Joe, they want it both ways. They don't want career politicians, but then when somebody comes along who doesn't have the credentials of a politician, they say, well, they don't have experience. Well, you can't have it both ways. You're either going to get the swamp or you're going to get some people who are going to do something about the swamp. But you can't have it both ways. What do you say?
I would agree. It's easy to see the fish in the barrel. It's hard to pull them out. Like the game is rigged, as Donald Trump has rightfully said. What she said is right. It's getting it done. And the people have to enable it to get done, meaning the people in the Congress, they're not going to do it.
Well, they did succeed. They did succeed on a couple. You mentioned accountability. Now, I don't know all the minutia of the rule, okay? But my understanding is one of the concessions from McCarthy was the way it used to be before the Julius Caesar might actually, if he was alive, be a little envious of Nancy Pelosi, how much of a dictator as Speaker of the House she actually became. Because you never hear dissent on the left. That's not because there's not dissenters on the left, Joe. That's because Nancy Pelosi didn't allow for their voices to be heard. Okay, let's be clear about that. Having said that, is that one of the rules was that one member of the House, one, could call for a vote to remove the Speaker. One. Nancy Pelosi, I believe, undid that. Boebert and Matt Gaetz, that was fundamental to their list of demands, as they wanted that rule reinstated. Sorry out there at the Crusade Channel. People listening to us, I forgot the name of the rule. It's a Jeffersonian motion, I believe. But along those lines, that means that one person who's got some stones can get up there and throw a wrench into the machine, Joe.
But
now, whether they get pushed or not,
Joe, all it is a vote. All it is now we have to vote.
Okay, but everything. How about this? Let me throw this out there to you. Because I agree with you. In my heart, I agree with you. Okay. I believe the system's broken. That's why we have to try to shake it up any way we can. The things that they're proposing, and I mean Gaetz and Boebert and the Freedom Caucus, are things that should have been in place, like voting on one issue, not big bills with 9,000 things in there, okay, that you can't even read. You can't drop a bill in the middle of the night. You got to have 72 hours to read the bill. And other things that, at the very least, Joe Rossinello, chip away. Now, whether or not they're going to be successful, how far they're going to go in trying to drain the swamp, to borrow a phrase, I don't know. But I think I'm going to be a little bit more optimistic because I think they know what they're doing. I think Matt Gaetz is a smart guy and knew what he was doing. If it was a futile effort, Joe, I don't think he would have gone that far.
Well, he never voted for him. He voted present.
No, I know, but he voted present knowing McCarthy would become Speaker of the House.
No, but I get it. But he didn't go. If he was the last holdout, I don't think, just because a couple things, no one's getting him out now that he's in. No one. If you want to drain the swamp, Donald Trump tried. He didn't succeed. He did not succeed. The only way to drain the swamp is to get a citizenry that sees clearly. And frankly, the only way to do that is if they gaze to God. That's how you drain the swamp. They represent us, Joe. Whether we want to admit that or not, what is in Congress is us as a nation. And it's poor. You want to go talk Catholic again? I heard this said and I liked it. The country is as strong as the Catholic Church is strong. And right now, the Catholic Church is very weak.
I agree
in
with
America. You want to drain the swamp. You have to get the church strong. You have to get people reorientated on a platform. Do you know why I used to be very, very, very frustrated with politics? Because I actually thought it was fair. I actually
I'm not
did.
laughing at you, Joe.
But it's not. And that's
Right.
why I don't get frustrated. I see it for what it is now. It's not there. It's not for the man, the common man. It's for the special interests. The swamp, no man can drain the swamp. You can't do it. It's
Right.
like you cannot move something that's immovable. It's impossible. The only way to drain the swamp, quote unquote, is to reconfigure it and reorientate it to God. How do you do that? You build strong families. How do you do that? You basically make and provide a society whereby religion is accessible. Religion isn't curtailed. It's in the public square, which benefits all people. Until that happens, and that's why it's not a political battle, because the swamp cannot be drained. Can't be drained.
Joe,
Can't be done.
I agree with you in my heart. In my heart, I know that what you're saying is true. And I'm not going to say but, because I know that's kind of like what you think I might be saying. I would say what you're saying is true, while at the same time, we do have to start at the very least making some moves, on the political level that'll at least get us back to some semblance of sanity. Now, again, I agree with our long-term problems are the problems of all empires. In the American empire, a lot of people, E. Michael Jones will tell you flat out, the American empire is coming to an end. And we have had an American empire, and it's a damn shame. I love my country. I loved growing up in Newark, New Jersey. I love the freedoms that, by the way, Joe, in our lifetimes, I can't take for granted anymore. I would have thought 30, 40, 50 years ago, you could say whatever you want in public. Nobody's going to accuse you of a crime. You can't say that in 2023, can you? You can't say that. Our country is going to hell, okay? And we do need not a reformation in our politics. We need a resurgence in our spiritual life, objective reality, objective truth. Again, we mentioned this earlier about Pope Benedict VI fighting against the dictatorship of relativism, which is part of what leads to what has manifested itself in this swamp of a government that we have. So I agree with you, but I am still going to applaud the efforts of Matt Gaetz. I think at the very least, not only providing Joe and Joe with some entertainment and those who listen to us at the Crusade channel.
I applaud what he did.
All right, I applaud what they did.
Actually, I think he is. I really, honestly, Joe, I applaud absolutely what he did. All of them. But ultimately, I'll be truthful with you. I don't think it could be done. Like Joe, it has to be done. Giuliani fixed the crime of New York. How did he do it? He addressed the low petty crime. It built upon that. And then little by little, it got bigger and bigger. Right. It has to begin at a grassroots level. The family has to be strengthened. We have to basically produce healthy people. We're not doing that, Joe.
Well, I know what you're saying.
People, they're not healthy. They're wounded. They're broken. And to be honest with you, they're unleashed on society. Many of them run things.
Listen, all you got to do is go. We got to leave, Joe, but all you have to do is go look at social media and you see what's going on out there. And if you don't shake your head and realize there's something not politically, but spiritually wrong with America is going on, then I'm sorry. I think you're misdiagnosing the problem. Thank you, everybody out there, for joining us at the Frontline with Joe and Joe. We ask you to help Joe and I. Please go Frontline with Joe and Joe on YouTube and hit the like button or the dislike button. It all helps us. And share the video with your friends. And on Twitter, @WithJoeandJoe, @WithJoeandJoe. Please follow us there. We're really trying to build up our Twitter presence. And as always, we ask you to go to crusadechannel.com, the last live radio station standing. Kick the tires, look under the hood. We know that you're going to love the lineup and you're going to want to become a member of the Crusade channel. And remember, until the next time, that our conversation is your conversation, and that conversation is going on every